There are four quotes that provide an incredible context to what the family is. George Santayana said this: "The family is one of nature's masterpieces." Will Durant said, "The family is the nucleus of civilization." Alex Haley said, "In every conceivable manner, the family is the link to our past and bridge to our future." And George Bernard Shaw said, "Perhaps the greatest social service that can be rendered by anybody in this country and to mankind is to bring up a family." The family has changed. 15 to 20 years ago, the statement was, "Families are changing." Well, ladies and gentlemen, that statement is both a past reality and a future norm. What those changes mean have generated scores of conferences and books and research and talk shows and podcasts and newspaper articles and magazines even, and on and on and on. Over the next few weeks on the Wise Idea podcast, I want to invite you into our conversation about family life. We are going to address it from multiple angles and in multiple ways. We'll dig into some pretty difficult conversations and we'll laugh at some others. We're going to talk through parenting and marriage and blended family, singleness, adoption, infertility, and even what families should do about end-of-life care and even death. As we continue to lay out this series and invite our guests, I want to invite you as an audience member to submit questions and engage in our dialogue with us during this particular series of episodes. If you have questions that you would specifically like for us to address or deal with or even wrestle with, feel free to send us an email to info, I-N-F-O, at thewiseideapodcast.com. Again, that's info, I-N-F-O, at thewiseideapodcast.com. You can also direct message us, DM us, or inbox us on Instagram or Facebook. Now, let's jump in to our conversation about family life.
Welcome to the Wise Idea Weekly Podcast with Christopher J. Harris, focusing on life, leadership, family, marriage, and the church. We are providing tools for our inspiration and wisdom for life. Our goal is to inspire everyday people to live wise lives. If you're new to us, we release a brand new podcast weekly on Thursdays. Thank you for tuning in for this week's episode. Here's our host, Christopher J. Harris.
Hello, my friends. Welcome again to another episode of the Wise Idea Weekly Podcast with Christopher J. Harris. I am your host, Christopher J. Harris. Woo! And I'm so excited. Every single week, y'all tune in, and it is an incredible, incredible blessing. We literally have people all over the world that are tuning in every single week. And, the highest form of appreciation is really to say thank you. I don't know what else to say other than to say thank you. You guys are absolutely amazing. You are interacting with the content. You are engaging with the conversation. You are sharing it. You are asking questions. You are following up. And I'm just so thankful and humbled by it. Listen, I know that our announcer shared some things with you at the beginning of this broadcast, this episode. But let me just ask you and invite all of you, and I want to say it every single week because you may be listening to this podcast for the first time, and I don't want to take for granted that you know that this is how we flow. But listen, I want to invite every single one of you, if you would, go to iTunes or go to Google Play Market and leave a rating and a review. That is actually how other listeners find our podcast. So thank you in advance for doing that. Thank you in advance for helping us to make that happen. I'm extremely honored because every single week, our goal is to inspire everyday people to live wise lives. And if you're new to our broadcast, this is new to you, but I am personally passionate about life and leadership, family and marriage, and ministry. That is specifically the church. And so that's the focus of our podcast. John Maynard Keynes said this, that ideas shape the course of history. And I like to edit that simply by saying that wise ideas positively change the course of lives. Over the past few weeks, we have been in this series about family life. We've talked about everything from singleness to marriage to parenting. We're going to have some future episodes talking about senior care, taking care of those who are older in your family. We've talked about the blended family. We've talked about adoptions, infertility, the whole 9 yards. Today is going to be a little bit of a different episode, but I think a necessary conversation. And I could not think of anybody better than my childhood, adulthood pastor, my family member, one of my members of my personal board of directors. He's a pastor. He's a licensed funeral director. He is a elected official, having been on the county commission in Putnam County, Florida, city mayor, city commissioner, and the list goes on and on and on and on and on and on and on. And I got to tell you that he's one of the best in the business, and it's really a ministry, and we're going to get into that. But everybody, welcome to The Wise Idea. Pastor Carl N. Flagg. He is the owner and CEO of Serenity Memorial Chapel. Pastor Flagg, how are you, sir?
Good morning. I'm doing extremely well. Deeply honored to be in on the conversation this morning.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. And I'm honored to have you on. So this is a little bit different conversation we're recording today and having you in the studio. Most people don't like to talk about death.
Well, I have not met anyone yet that wants to talk about it. There are people who are recognizing the necessity of talking about it, but it's not a subject that people have top on their list.
Yeah, and we don't even have to be people of faith to acknowledge that everybody at some point is going to die.
Well, it is an appointment. There's no question about that. It is an appointment that we didn't make, and it's also an appointment that we can't break.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. And I've got lots of diversity on in my audience and in the Wise Idea tribe. So today is not so much, we'll get into that maybe a little bit later on. I'm not in the goal today of trying to scare anybody into making a decision about their faith, although I unapologetically believe in Jesus Christ. Today, I want to have a conversation with you about death and dying and end of life decisions, conversations that we need to have, and even maybe some awkward things that come up that people say when a loved one or a family member or even a distant person that they're maybe distantly familiar with passes away or ends this life or leaves this life. So first of all, where do we start the conversation? What are some of the things that people need to be thinking about when the conversation around death comes up?
Well, it's always a such thing as preparation. Most people are engaged every day with the fear of the unknown. It's like we don't know. In life, there are so many uncertainties, and that's why we need to have the safety and security of having a personal relationship with the Lord. However, in reality, many people walk through life in a state of denial. It's, I hear over and over and over, I didn't know this was going to happen. I'm like, are you serious? I just didn't know. We don't know when, and we don't know necessarily the manner, but we know that it is inevitable that we will reach that appointment date. And so preparation-wise, bringing family members in, having a succession plan. Most people think of a succession plan for businesses, but there must be a succession plan for families, because the most divisive moment in every family that I have experienced over the past nearly 50 years has been when a death has occurred.
Wow. So let me do this really fast. And I may have been moving too fast, just getting excited about having you on and jumping into the conversation. Let me back up just for a second, because I don't want to understate your credentials. I don't want to understate your expertise. So really fast, tell everybody that's listening, you don't like to talk about yourself, but take a moment and just share with everybody your credentials and your experience in this area.
Well, I have been blessed to have been in this profession since my early childhood. I was about 10 years old in the fifth grade, and each and every day following school hours, I was on my way via my bicycle to the funeral home. And I spent, it was like a 7-day-a-week occurrence there, because most people who recognize professional givers of in funeral service, that it's not a banker's hours situation. It's around the clock, 7 days a week. And so my life has been dedicated to ministry as a youth minister up through becoming a pastoral leader. So I've served almost 50 years in the profession, working up through the ranks, starting with digging graves and washing cars, and all the way up through becoming a funeral director, embalmer. Well, of course, I had to do an internship prior to that. And now for the past 22 years, I have been CEO and owner of Flag Serenity. Coupled with that, I started in youth ministry at age 11. And so at Mount Tabor First Baptist Church, I have served for the past 28 years. And so it's been a wonderful experience from the perspective of serving at the most neediest time of a person's family's life.
So some of y'all, if you don't know me, you may not know that I think I followed in his footsteps a little bit. I wasn't 11, I was 12, but he is the pastor that I preached my first sermon with, and I saw him. He said something to me. It had to be at least 20 years ago, if not longer, that really stood out to me, and that is that it's not just a business, but doing end-of-life care and handling funerals and the funeral business is ministry. And I've seen him live that out. And so, Pastor Flagg, let's debunk some of the myths around funeral homes and funeral directors and all of that. And some of this may be, strange or funny to some people, but let's debunk some of those myths. So what are some of the craziest things you've heard people think or believe about funeral homes and funeral directors?
Well, first of all, they have said over the years that all funeral directors have a drinking problem. They have to get drunk to deal with some of the things that they witness and that they see. And I mean, everyone has some type of an addiction, but the best addiction that I've discovered is an addiction on Christ. And if Christ doesn't get you through it, you won't get through it. There are many traumatizing moments there, but I have not had a need to ingest alcohol. That's
so they actually feel like you have to get you a little drink in there, huh?
Yeah, they say you got to get a little something for your nerves, and so I treat my nerves with the Word of God.
Okay, what are some other myths that you've heard?
Well, I've heard that people don't take their last breath until they get to the funeral home, and that oftentimes people are not deceased when you get them, and that they are in the process of dying. And I can't speak for the many years ago before we had the technology to determine clinical death and when there's a cessation of life. But I have not had the experience of having someone that was near dead at the funeral home. They have been completely deceased upon arrival. Many people, again, just have this fear. And it's amazing that they believe whoever's talking, they believe that person as if that person has credentials in this profession. And it goes from one end of the spectrum to the other. What people believe, they always think that there is that funeral homes is a get rich quick profession, that kind of thing, and they don't realize, again, that your overhead, just as in any other business, is pretty phenomenal, and you must continue to work, and it's a lot of sacrificing, quite a bit of sacrificing.
And the truth is too, you all, and I say you all, those of you that are doing it the right way, you make a lot of concessions, as well as you have to balance the business decisions with the emotional carnage that is happening when a person loses a loved one. Let's talk about that for a moment. And that's part of the reason why I want having this discussion, because I feel like there are some things that we can start to think about and people can start to process on the front end, as you said earlier, preparation, so that some decisions are already made when life ends.
Well, the problem that we encounter each day is that when one family member bring up the issue of making pre-arrangements or pre-financing, there's probably 9 out of 10 people saying, well, I'm not getting ready to die. Why are you doing that? Are you rushing me off? I mean, it goes on and on and on. And the person who is making the inquiry, or the person who is proactively saying, I don't want to be caught off guard, is the person who's actually right. It's like, where are the 9, so to speak? You know, that one person is really in pursuit of making sure that peace of mind, tranquility, and serenity is maintained. And it's not maintained when a death occurs, because the truth of the whole matter is no one knows precisely what they are going to be like when that death occurs. And so to have vital statistics on file, to have an idea of what the cost of the funeral services are going to be, to have an opportunity to discuss why I need certain components in order to have the celebration. Many families come in the door expecting a whole lot for little. And unfortunately, even the cemetery component the prices have skyrocketed. And it's better to have a plan rather than not have a plan.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because I think across all kinds of racial and ethnic backgrounds, I have seen the worst come out in people when there's a time of death that is taking place.
That's very modestly stated. People become monsters when there's a death there. And as a person is, all of the personality types come out when a person is going through grief. And unless that person, and even individuals who are people of faith, people who profess to have a relationship with God, death brings out so many underlying issues. And many people deal with guilt. Many people deal with denial. Many people just deal with bitterness and anger and envy and jealousy. I mean, everything that is even unimaginable comes out during this season of grief. And as a result of that, I try to be proactively, not in any way, shape, form, or fashion, trying to judge the family. But because of the experience and the institutional knowledge on the front side, I tell them, you've got to really work together. You've got to pray together. You've got to cry together. Be tolerable of each other, because at the end of the day, if you are not mindful, your family will become segregated. Your family will become polarized, and there will be other consequences. It shows up in your health. Many individuals that do not have any health issues end up in the hospital because they are internalizing their grief.
Yeah, and you know, this is the conversation that everybody doesn't want to have, but it's necessary. And I think even over the last couple of years, me now being in some of the ministry roles that I've been in as it relates to being a church consultant, I'm very surprised. I saw this locally in the churches that I've served in, but I'm very surprised even now, with as much information that we have and as much knowledge as we have, that people are still, they don't think about life insurance. They don't think about, pre-planning. We just had, Aretha Franklin pass away with no will. Prince passed away, no will. And so you've got these celebrities worth millions and millions of dollars. There's no pre-planning. And then bringing that back down to a local level, that you've got churches that are still, in some cases, having to step in and be a mediator for families who are fighting, and or having to foot the bill just to take care of a loved one.
That's a very sad but true commentary there. And the community, leaders in the community, whether it's pastoral leaders in the faith community, whether it's social, civic, or any other leaders, must address the issue. And I think public forums really is the way to go. What you're doing is phenomenal, to give people the opportunity, number one, to think about it. Secondly, to do something about it. And in many cases, the people who people trust are not prepared to even open up and engage in conversation with these individuals, because they have not pursued the truth. They have not consulted. And at the end of the day, whether you're a pastoral leader, whether you're a community leader, you cannot specialize in everything. And we need to respect each person's calling and their area of expertise and draw from that institutional knowledge, so that when these times come, it's not if these times come, it's when these times come, because they are inevitable. I mean, it's even more traumatic when there's a homicide, when there's a suicide, when there's an accidental death, because in many cases, people think if a person have a life-limiting illness, that, oh, well, we know, the doctor said 6 months. Sometimes the 6 months is 6 hours there. But then when an accident occur or some unknown event occur, it really, you can put a multiplier on how traumatic the experience is. And you are not going to learn everything you need to know when you are in the midst of the fiery furnace.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And, I can just say transparently, I think, and I say we, my family and I took some things for granted because we had you as a family member. So even when my grandmother and my grandfather passed away, there were some decisions that were already made. But then there were some decisions that were not. And again, fortunately, we had you to provide the insight for us as a family member to help us through the process. But there was no dissension. There was no fighting, even with the decisions that we had to make. My mother-in-law passed away. And again, there was no dissension and fighting. And even though there was a process there where we knew that this was going to be inevitable, I think some decisions we hadn't made on the front end. I'm blessed because my parents are still alive, but lots of the pre-planning has already been done. Right. So there's some things that have already been taken care of, both on my dad's side and my mom's side, to alleviate, well, I don't know if they want this, or I don't know if they want that, or, whatever those circumstances are. And even personally, my wife hated having this conversation. She absolutely hated it. She grew up in an environment where you just did not talk about death. Like, you just don't talk about it. And she hated having it. But I think she appreciates at least the fact that we have gotten that behind us, and there's some decisions that she knows that have already been made and already been taken care of. So what do you say to the people listening? Where do we start now with the questions? Okay, so Pastor Flagg, you've convinced me I need to be thinking about this, and I need to have this conversation. Where do I start?
Well, we first of all need to recognize the role and responsibility of the professional caregiver. And that's how we need to look at funeral directors. Many times, again, people will, in joking and jesting, say, oh, I hope I don't ever need you, and I'm going to stay away from you, that kind of thing. And yeah, you are going to stay away as long as you can, but inevitably, what needs to happen is there needs to be a relationship established with a trusted consultant. We all need to have a personal relationship with God. We need to have a personal relationship with our doctors. We need to have a personal relationship, obviously, within our own families. But we likewise need to have a strong relationship with our consultant for working on our automobile. We need a relationship with a funeral director. That needs to be a confidant. That needs to be a trusted friend. That needs to be a person who's competent in providing advice and counsel. Many times families want the funeral director to settle legal disputes between the family members, and no, that's not the role of there, but we need to really have the discussion. The issue that we have, that I have experienced more so than ever, is that families don't get along. They're not trusting each other. And at some point in time, they want the funeral director to put on a striped suit and be a referee, to be an umpire, and to try to create, to bring the family together. I've seen many families hold hands, love each other in the public, hug each other, greet each other. And it's almost like the Hatfields and the McCoys off stage. When the lights are out, it's almost like cowboys and Indians. And it's very traumatizing. The funeral director is having to balance between who is the beneficiary, who is the next of kin. And at the end of the day, if there's two different people and those two people don't get along, now all of a sudden we need a fire department to come put the fire out. I mean, it is just that bad. There are times that we're having services. One group of the family is sitting on one side. The other group say, I don't want to sit with them. I want to sit on the other side. And we're sitting up in God's house there hearing a message talking about the person we love. Yet there is so much division and so much dissension in the family until it's a heartbreaker. But this is what we're dealing with. So I think, first of all, families need to reunite. And that's why every family ought to have family reunions. You would also be surprised that many people don't know their family's background. You're asking simple questions. Where were they born? What is the father's name? What is the mother's name, including the maiden name? And it's like, can I get back with you? Because they just don't know. And the conversation has always been taboo, where you just don't ask. It's almost like that military, don't ask, don't tell, that kind of thing. But it's very essential that we know these things.
Well, let me ask, have you ever not been able to have a funeral, host a funeral because of family disagreements?
Well, we have had to have law enforcement in many cases there. We've also had to put families in timeout and say, the truth of the whole matter is we cannot serve you if you all don't come together and come to some level of reasoning. Now, it also gets to the point that immediate family members are not even sure which funeral home that they want to serve their family. And so you've got a portion that want your funeral home, you got a portion that want the funeral home down the street and around the corner. And as a result of that, now you have, you're at a disadvantage, because the family who wants another funeral home, it does not matter what you do, how well you do it, they're going to be displeased. And I do my very best to try to reach a consensus and bridge the gap and ask family members, please follow peace. Take the high road, please. No fighting, no feuding. Every family have what we call internal affairs, but when your internal affairs are converted to external affairs, then that's when the deal is off.
Wow. So I found this list of decisions that you have to make for a family member or for family when a loved one passed away. It's a list of 126 things. I'm going to put this in the show notes for all of our listeners to find this. But you referenced earlier a statement. You said vital statistics, and then you just mentioned that about things that you should know about your family. Just under vital statistics, it's got a list of 21 things that we should know. So the full legal name, the home address, home phone number, cellular number, how long in a state, list of addresses, occupation and title, type of business, business address, social security number, a veteran serial number. You'll have to tell us what that means. Date of birth, place of birth, citizenship, the mother's maiden name, mother's birthplace, father's name, father's birthplace, religious identification, marital status, list of marriages if that's necessary, and then official spouse's name and maiden name.
Yeah, well, when you talk about veteran serial number, what really is needed is what we call a DD-214, which is the military discharge. And that's very important, because if a person has any type of discharge other than honorable, then that's a game changer. Nowadays, people are making decisions as to whether they want to be interred in a veteran cemetery, in one of our national cemeteries, and also whether or not a flag drapes the casket, whether there's a headstone that's going to be provided there, and whether they're going to be military honors. Everything from a presidential citation through the opportunity to have what you would call those honors at the church or at the gravesite. And if that person is a career serviceman or servicewoman, then there's also what you call full military honors, which means that there is, even the 21 gun salute, as we call it. So documentation of everything, having bank records, insurance records, and educational records and things of that nature, because at the end of the day, the funeral home cannot really launch an investigation between time of death and time of service to authenticate the information that is being provided by family members. And at the end of the day, this may sound a little bit far off, but some people don't know the legal name of the person that's deceased, especially if it's a female, because they went in, they use one name, and then for benefits they use another name, and then they're married to someone else that provided them another name, and so it really becomes convoluted and super complex.
Gee whiz. I never even thought about all of that.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It's phenomenal. And then there's another issue that we have discovered with all of the, I guess you would call it homeland security checks and things of that nature. People have been spelling their name one way, and then now that we're doing all of the national security checks and things of that nature, people now finding out that their name is spelled another. I had a classic example of having a wrong birthday. My very own mother celebrated her birthday November 29th, 1921, when she got ready to draw from her Social Security. There, they said, Miss Flagg, your date of birth is October the 30th, 1920. Well, of course, she didn't get mad. She wanted us to celebrate 2 birthdays, and plus she got a few more extra coins because of the date being a year earlier. So
that is hilarious.
It's amazing. All of the things are there. Spelling of names, letters transposed, especially those who may have been delivered by a midwife, and sometimes the poor penmanship caused the record to have split vowels. I mean, whatever. Anything you can imagine, we encounter.
So I guess that gets into another thing that we generally don't do well at home, or families don't do well, in terms of keeping accurate records, or having a place where, in a sense, I say it this way, where we've got an office at home, where there's somewhere where these records are kept, accurate records are kept.
Yeah, back in the day, many of the generations past had what we would call a safe deposit box at the bank. And I mean, everything that was important, they took it to the bank. Well, those days have come and gone to a degree. Many individuals do have documents, but they're not securing those documents in the house. They're just in a manila folder somewhere, nothing in a locked box, or nothing in a safe haven within the home. And so as a result of an incident, or whether it's somebody that's doing spring cleaning, and don't realize the importance of documents and things of that nature and all, they say, oh, this is old, it has no relevance. Or in the unfortunate circumstance where there's a house fire or some kind of flooding, people lose everything. And again, it does not just happen on a residential level. We have many individuals in the military. There was a certain time frame where those records were actually lost. And that's why every person, I don't care if you served 1 year or you served 20 years, if you do not have a current discharge paper up there, please go to the Veteran Service Office within your own county, and each county has Veteran Service offices. Get your documentation, because the funeral home can be sympathetic and empathetic, but we can't give you what you have earned if there's no documentation.
So has there been cases where a person has tried to argue that they were honorably discharged or what have you, they weren't, or they didn't have the proof, and you literally just you couldn't give them the flag, or you couldn't give them the, whatever those veterans' request would be?
That is more common than we would want it to be. The family kind of sort of puts us on trial as if we should have had the documentation, or we are personally aware, because again, when you're in a community where everybody know each person, that's there, and oh yeah, I know this person served, but we can know a whole lot of things. If there's no documentation, then there's no way for us to sign an affidavit or anything of that nature to cause benefits to flow. Documentation is the key there. Many individuals, you would be surprised of how many people don't have their birth certificate there. And a lot of the information that we need to put on the death certificate is already on the birth certificate, but families don't have it. And while things are as well as they are, it would be advisable to have the birth certificate, to have the Social Security card, to have the military discharge papers, to have diplomas, degrees, things of that nature. And what would really be awesome for all of us to do is to write our own obituary. Now that sounds really, morbid, I guess. But at the end of the day, there are things about you that no one will ever know if you don't make it known, or if there's not some documentation that's there. And I think that would just be, and many people that are in sociology classes, psychology classes, these are assignments that they have to fulfill. They have to not only write out their obituary, they have to write out their order of service, and things of that nature and all. And I've had many students to come to me and say, listen, I'm in class and I've got to do this and I need you to help me. I need you to help facilitate that. But it's just such a small group because it's an assignment. That person would not be doing it if it was not an assignment. And I think everyone need to take up that assignment. The thing that really troubles me is when we have senior citizens that have lived 70 years, 80 years, 90 years, 100 years. Many of them have outlived their peers, outlived family members, outlived classmates. I mean, you name it. And there's no one who has institutional knowledge, any background, and we end up really just writing a generic obituary because no one really knows the details. And these people are phenomenal people in the community, individuals who have been pillars in the community, and so forth and so on. And you're having to say they were a loving person, they were a compassionate person. That's not really drilling down on to me have achieved.
Wow. So much good information. So let's turn the corner on this part of the conversation, and let's talk about the thing that even in this conversation, the conversation that everybody doesn't want to have. Let's talk about it even deeper. This part people really don't want to talk about, and that is, let's talk about the money for a moment.
Okay.
So let's talk about, generally speaking, what things people have to consider when they talk about funeral costs. I'm not even in this conversation. I've got another guest that's going to be on where we talk about end of life care and all those kinds of things. He has an earned doctorate in senior care and all of those kinds of things. He is a vice president for AARP in Washington, D.C. and all of that. So he's going to talk a little bit about those things. But from a funeral and end of life care standpoint, what are the things that people need to be prepared so that they don't have sticker shock when it comes to the money?
Well, at the end of the day, the conversation must be held. What are the expectations of the end of life celebration? What are the wishes? What are the preferences there? There are many people who want full service funerals, homegoing celebrations, but they're operating on a zero budget or a cremation budget there. The cost of funerals vary, actually, not just from community to community, but from funeral home to funeral home, because the funeral expenses are directly tied into the overhead of each institution. So you may have one price at one funeral home, another price at another funeral home, but at the end of the day, there should be what you would call comparable prices there based upon the average. Most individuals, there is a national average for the cost of funeral services there. Again, with all due respect, consideration, you will not gain access to a cemetery in a more metro area at the same cost that you will in a rural area, because again, you really have to look at it as a real estate transaction. And you could have two cemeteries across the street from each other, and they both offer different levels of service. And so we have to, first of all, establish what level of service do we want? What level of service do we expect? The old saying, you get what you pay for. Many times when you see funeral homes advertising 1995 specials and things of that nature, I don't knock those who do that, but that is a misnomer, because at the end of the day, if you don't go in and make pre-arrangements and know what the total cost of the services are going to be, that's a get you in the door kind of circumstance that you're dealing with. People need to decide what they want. When they decide what they want, take out the time, make an appointment, schedule the time for you and your loved ones to come together and have that pre-arrangement conference, even if there are no commitments, even if there is no contract or relationship established, so that you will know precisely. For an example, we have had cemeteries that the starting price going in the cemetery is $5,000. Well, the person walk in the door and they say, well, here's my $5,000 policy. And you look at them and now you're trying to figure out, what do I tell them? How do I express to them that $5,000 will not even cover the cemetery cost? Because in the cemetery, in many cases, you have to have a burial vault. You have to have not only the plot itself, but you have to pay for the opening and closing of the grave. You have to pay for the cemetery setup. There's a monument requirement in the perpetual care cemeteries. And so you can get up to $3,000, $5,000, $7,000. I mean, it goes on and on and on. Various sections of the cemetery. If you're on the hill, you're going to pay more for being on the hill. If you're down near where there is a pond, you're going to pay, various prices for that. So at the end of the day, depending on what area, what region you live in, what cemetery your family have plots in, that information needs to be delivered to the funeral home so that there can be what you would call an itemization of services, talk about non-declinable expenses, talk about options. Family needs to know 1 limousine, 2 limousines, no limousines. Those are the variables, but there are some non-declinable expenses, such as the embalming, such as the removal of there, and then staffing of the funeral service, staffing of the visitation and all. So people talk about packages. A package is fine if you read all the details in the package and you need everything that's in the package. Otherwise, you could be overpaying. So even that sometimes is used as a gimmick. Well, I got this package and you're going to save all of this money. The law requires, Federal Trade Commission regulations require every funeral home to explain every detail for every line item, every charge down to the penny. Why am I paying for this? Why do I need this? All of those things are crucial.
So I heard a whole lot just then. I mean, one of the first things I heard as a takeaway is just sit down and have the conversation before it's required to have the conversation.
Absolutely. Do it as an accessory and not as a necessity.
Yeah. So I heard that. I think the second thing is, and let's just be honest, and say that in many cases too, some of this conversation has gotten a bad rap because just like in every industry, you have people who have not done the right thing by people.
Oh my, you have really hit the nail on the head, as the expression goes, in every profession. And obviously, again, whether it's a public office, whether it's a professional office, whether it's just a fruit stand beside the road, in every area of discipline in life, you have individuals who are really by the book, follow all regulations, seek to understand what the truth is and what the requirements are to be successful. Now, there are some unwritten laws, and those unwritten laws, I call them ethics. And at the end of the day, what's morally right, what's ethically right, what's spiritually right, what's professionally right, we need to make sure that we are dealing with all of those issues above board, because it's not what you do when the lights are on and the stage curtains are open. It's what you do and who you are more than anything else. And I think that the unethical practitioners actually have made the road much more difficult for all of us.
So I know if for beauticians or hairdressers or barbers, they've had to go in and fix what other people have messed up. Does that happen in the funeral business?
Well, unfortunately, it does. Many individuals are competent with their people skills. Many individuals have great marketing skills, but the practice of embalming is both an art and a science, and there needs to be competence, there needs to be excellence in the preparation room. You must have time, talent, and you must treasure what you do, because at the end of the day, you are creating a final memory picture for the family. And sometimes it's not the same person that's doing everything. And so if a professional funeral director does not have the gift, the skill, and the talent in the lab, they need to hire someone who does have that demonstrated experience that's there. Because once you create that memory picture, it is never going to leave. It'll be there.
Wow. So let's again, I'm gonna provide a list of these 126 things, even in terms of the cemetery arrangements, funeral arrangements, that people have to think about, payment of services, other things that you've got to think through, in terms of bills to pay, the clothing, transportation, clergy, medical bills, burial estate, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Let's shift gears for a moment and let's talk about, I've heard people say some of the craziest things when a person passes away.
Mm-hmm.
You've been in this business for 4 decades.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the things that you've heard people say that you heard it, but you almost were a loss of words for what you heard?
Wow. That is a very difficult question, because over and over and over, we have individuals who say things out of their mouths. And then, first of all, you're in a state of unbelief, or you're just in a state of shock. And it's like, I really cannot believe that this person just said this out of their mouth. And many times they're saying things that their loved one wanted done, and it's impossible to do what they suggested that their loved one wanted done, and there's nobody to dispute what the individual have said as it relates to how we're going to do it. I say, okay, now this person made the request. They said precisely, this is what I want, but they didn't leave the means in which to achieve and the means to accomplish what they suggested. So as a result of that, you're stuck with this person said, I wanted to change clothes. I want 3 viewings, and I want to have on a different outfit each time people see me. And it's like, okay, all right. People say, well, don't you cut the clothes anyway? The clothing is not the right size. They say, well, you're going to cut it anyway. Well, back in the day, maybe many funeral homes cut the clothing. Well, we use hydraulic lifts at our particular firm. And so as a result of that, we're able to use the clothing. And if the clothing is the right size, which is what we request, then we're not having to cut the clothing. But it goes from one end of the spectrum to the other as far as what people's expectations are, and then their mechanism of helping the funeral director, make it happen.
Yep. And so even on that end of it, what have you heard people say to other people when, a loved one, I heard somebody say one time, oh, well, you're going to be all right. God just came. He wanted to pick the prettiest flower in the garden.
That burns me up. I mean, that if you really want to get me riled up to hear a pastor say it, to hear what you call holier than thou people say it, I'm like, in my mind, I'm already saying, please sit down and shut up and let's get the rest of the story so that we can give these people facts. First of all, God didn't pluck no flower. You can pick a flower and everybody can still be living. That person was not a flower. They were not in the rose garden. God was not taking a walk in the garden and he looked and saw that this particular flower was flourishing and he wanted this flower. Some people say God only chooses the best. Well, what about the rest of us? If God is choosing the best and you're going to be fine, all you got to do is keep your trust in God and this, that, and the other. Grief will grip your very soul. And we cannot have phony and false theology telling people they're going to be all right unless we are able to really minister to them. Some people already have clinical deficits and issues that they're dealing with. And so a person laying their hands on them and speaking in tongues, praises God, praises be unto God, is not going to heal that person. Is not going to deliver that person. That person needs to be able to speak about their loss. They need to be able to accept their loss, because there are 7 steps minimally of dealing with grief. And as you go through each step, then at the end of the day, we need to recognize and realize in those 7 steps of grief that each process does not start like 7 days in a work week. Some are extended longer than others. And Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who is a noted professional on grief, death, dying, and bereavement. Tried her very best to make sure that we understood that one size does not fit all and that everybody grieves differently. Now, the other thing that I want to say is there's something called guilt that will multiply grief. Many people don't talk about that, because if you have unfinished issues with the loved one that is gone, whatever steps that normal people go through, you can put a multiplier on it. And it actually could lead to such a great depression that there's a suicide or there's a homicide or anything of that nature following the grief that you're already dealing with that complexes and compounds the entire issue.
Wow. Well, we're thinking the same. You mentioned the 7 stages of grief. I just pulled it up on my device here to reference it, and then you, without even any discussion between the two of us, you brought it up. So really fast, for those of you that are listening, the 7 stages of grief, and I'll link this in our show notes. I'm not going to be able to break down each one of them, but just for the point of reference, for the sake of our discussion, I'm just going to mention them for you to dig more into this Kubler-Ross model and all of that. There's lots of videos on YouTube. There's lots of resources that you can go and read to dig into it. But I would encourage those of you that are listening to this, if you're in one of these stages of grief or you're not sure about grief, counseling is a healthy option for you. Sit down and talk to somebody. Don't try to work through it alone or in silence. So you've got shock, you've got denial, you've got anger, you've got bargaining, depression, testing, and acceptance. Those are the 7 stages that she lists as the stages of grief. And as Pastor Flagg referenced, you can go in and out of those various stages. You don't necessarily follow those in a linear process. You can get to testing and go all the way back to shock and still have to work through that whole process.
That's correct.
So we're going to get ready to land this plane, Pastor Flagg, in a number of ways. This has been absolutely amazing, because I think the goal of my podcast when I started it was to have conversations in a way that would raise ideas and raise thoughts that people would see things differently. And I think today's conversation, while for some people has been, I could just imagine somebody in their car, at work, or at home listening to this podcast, and they're feeling all kinds of awkwardness and EBGBs and all of that. But I think we've raised some conversation to take off some of the mystique and some of the unknown and the uncertainty. This is just as much of a conversation that people, I feel like, have to have as you have to think about what kind of tires you buy for your car, or the vacuum cleaner that you buy for your house, or what kind of soap you use to take a bath every day, or the kind of deodorant that you use so that you don't walk around with body odor. So what are a couple of the things that you, in your profession and in your expertise, know that we need to be thinking about or suggesting that maybe I didn't ask the question already, or maybe there's something else that you wanted to mention that has come up in your mind?
We cannot underestimate or miscalculate personal preferences. To give an example, I've had many families to walk into the casket selection room, and they're browsing the room and they're looking at the various makes and models and the quality craftsmanship of the caskets. And all of a sudden, they lose sight of who they are actually selecting a casket for, because it's a male that is deceased, but they're looking at pink caskets, unless there's some other internal family business that nobody knows about. But anyway, what I'm saying is many times a person's preferences supersede the preferences of the person who they're making arrangements for. So we need to ask those questions. What are your favorite colors? I was speaking with a mother, a church mother, just in visitation. I'm like, Mother, what is your favorite hymn? What is your favorite scripture? What are your favorite colors? And I just think that all need to know the preferences of the person who they're taking responsibility for, to honor their life, so that their life is even more meaningful in transition. Because again, keyword is not if, the keyword is when, and it's all about preparation. I say to every family that comes in for prearrangements, I want to commend you. I want to thank you for being proactive. And I also want to assure you that you're not hastening the day of the appointment. That appointment is assigned by God, but you will appreciate this later, that you were proactive and you made this decision, to do what needed to be done. Now, the other thing that I want to mention is that in every family, you have people that are dominant. And in that person that's dominant, sometimes they are overactive. They are super active, and they're making decisions and making arrangements, and they're doing a lot of things, and they have 14 other brothers and sisters and all. And then all of a sudden, they say, "Oh, everything is already done," and the rest of the family say, "Oh no, it's not already done. We know nothing about it." Now you have another issue on your hands. So everybody who is a decision maker, everybody that's in an immediate family setting, please don't do private business with the funeral director, because you're putting that funeral director in a place where people will not trust that director, because they're thinking that there's some kind of conspiracy between the funeral director and, quote, the main or the key player. So we need to make sure that right hand and left hand is in constant communication.
So, Pastor, we did not talk about talk about anything with regards to insurances or, that kind of thing. And that impacts the budget and decisions and money. We talked a little bit about that. But what would you recommend at a minimum are the kinds of insurances that people need to have or think about to make this process a little bit easier?
Well, the first thing I would want to say is know your insurance agent or agency, just like you know your doctor and your pastor. Make sure that you're able to sit down and I would say expose your financial abilities, your family's issues, because everything, your age, your health, your relationships as it relates to economics, all of those things play a role. And that insurance professional ought to be able to tell you whether term life insurance, whole life insurance, or special insurance is good. One thing that really devastates a funeral home is for a family to walk in the door and say, "Mr. Flag or Mr. Funeral Director, I have $25,000 of coverage so I can get anything I want," only to find out that that is an accidental policy and the person died of natural causes, just had a heart attack and died. That policy is worth absolutely $0.00. And it's a heartbreaker. The other thing is that is very crucial. An insurance policy, although it is in force, the day you take it out, it does not pay full value. If it's a whole life policy, it does not pay full value until it's over 2 years old. 2 years and a day, you're fine. Families walk through the door. I have a $10,000 policy to handle these expenses. How old is the policy? Oh, we took it out 3 months ago. The insurance company will refund you your premiums plus 4 or 5% interest on your money. You will not get the full value of that policy. So we need to make sure, even nowadays, I'm hearing commercial advertisements encouraging people to cash their insurances in and things of that nature and all. If you're going to cash insurance in, you best better have a bank account that's set aside with an irrevocable trust, something to cover those expenses. Because if you take out a new policy that may be less per month and that policy does not make the 2-year threshold, you have $0 are the premiums that you paid in. And that is not good. The funeral home is always, in many cases, looked upon as being, they won't have the funeral until we get the money. Well, the funeral home has an overhead that must be met. And at the end of the day, whether you change funeral homes or not, the rule of thumb is this: if you can't pay one funeral home, you certainly can't pay two. And so, work with the funeral director, who is your preference, but come in the door with your insurance policy, come in the door with an account that you've already set aside the funds on. And in many cases, sometimes the policy is 30 years old. They paid more in the policy than they'll ever get out of it. So check out the cash value, check out the options with a professional there, and even the funeral director will help you analyze your policies and and give you some recommendations. But always remember, go to the expert in the specific area that you're seeking information.
I'm just shaking my head because these are conversations that What would you guess? What is the percentage of Americans? We'll just keep it American for a moment, even though we've got people all over the world that are listening in. What is the percentage of Americans who you feel like maybe have this conversation?
I hate to randomly guess this number, but I would think that it is definitely less than 25%.
So 75% of the people are not having this conversation, and yet are going to have the conversation at some point.
Exactly. And again, the emotional stress on an individual when a loved one is gone is phenomenal. And now you're having to make funeral arrangements, and you do not have the economic means to do so. You can take your grief factor up probably quadruple times there. And again, we've had people that stressed over not having any means to bury their loved one, and they have been hospitalized, which further delayed the funeral. And we've also had situations wherein a family who preferred to have a burial so that they could be right next to the loved one in the cemetery, but they ended up having to resort to cremation, and sometimes cremation without even having what you call a full service with it, a direct cremation, because there was no funding. Or there was a situation where they couldn't find a policy, and they thought that someone else in the family was holding the policy and was going to come and try to obtain a death certificate later. So I mean, it's amazing the various issues that have come down the pipes.
So Pastor, if I were sitting here listening to this episode, one of the questions that would come up in my mind based on what you just said a little bit is, the question that I would have, is it wrong for a funeral home to hold the funeral up because the money hasn't been paid?
It's not wrong to hold it up. It's reasonable to expect that if you are requesting and requiring services, that you're coming with the means of affording and paying for the services that you are requesting.
Do funeral homes do payment plans?
Some funeral homes are economically able to do that. The majority of the funeral homes that I know recognize and realize that once the loved one has been put in their resting place, that when people have to pay a mortgage, they have to pay utility bills and things of that nature, that the funeral residual funeral expenses are just left there, and they're telling you, well, I had to pay my mortgage. I had to pay it. And I'm like, I do understand that. So let's not create a situation that causes families to decide that they're no longer going to use your services in the future. So it's a known fact among professional funeral directors that if a family owe one funeral home, when you look in the obituary column and another loved one has passed on, that the other funeral home down the street is serving that family, and they're not serving them because you did not service them well. They're serving them because that family owe you money, and they're calling the competitor, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, y'all are listening to this. This is real life. This is the real deal. And again, I know some people would probably ask, Christopher Harris, what are you thinking about that you would have this on the Wise Idea podcast? I'm having this discussion on the Wise Idea podcast because we need to have this discussion.
Amen.
Yeah, I just don't know any other way to say it. And it's awkward. I know that lots of people don't like to talk about it, but it's a reality. And it's probably best to do it while you're in the prime of your life. It's best to do it while things are going well. It's best to do it while you and your wife or you and your husband are on the same page and are getting along with each other and all those kinds of dynamics. So, Pastor Flagg, I am honored that you would be on. I do want to ask this that is a little bit separate from the conversation that we've been having, because I think this will help our listeners too to gain a little bit more respect for those that have to do this work. You called it ministry, but there's a lot of medical background that you've had to have as well to thrive in this space. So how do you de-escalate? How do you keep your bearings? How do you navigate, the being in a industry that's got so much emotion and so much that pulls on you as a service industry? Some people would say that funeral directors have never cried before. Have you cried? So what talk to us a little bit about some of that.
Well, first of all, the funeral director is human. And that's why I say it's so essential to know the funeral director on a personal level. The funeral practitioner must, first of all, be a compassionate caregiver, must be conscientious, must be sensitive to the families that entrust with their gift. And the gift is their loved one who has transitioned there. When you know that person and you recognize and realize that funeral director is not going to take advantage of you or your loved one while in care. I have a pet peeve with funeral homes in today's time, commercializing families, proselyting families, performing at funerals and showing out there, and the general population that's there. You have some people that are applauding the show. The funeral director must be, and I'm not saying that all need to be conservative or liberal. That's not the labeling that I'm talking about. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And I just believe that it's essential for us to demonstrate that we are truly compassionate, that it's not about the money. It's not about the dollar. You get what you pay for in many cases, but the trust factor is crucial. It's very crucial, and the respect has to be earned. Our motto is serving loving families with living memories, and that to me is the key to it all. I'm locked in. I'm committed to making sure that each family is getting a service of excellence above and beyond expectation, and we are recommending only things to families that we know will bring closure to them as well as peace of mind at the end of the day. One last thing that I failed to mention, next of kin. Next of kin. Next of kin is so crucial because at the end of the day, these live-in girlfriends and live-in boyfriends think they have power and think they have authority. They don't have any authority. If a man or a woman is separated from their spouse, I don't care if they were separated for 50 years, they are not divorced. That person is still in charge. They are the legal next of kin, and it does not matter what sister girl or brother man think. That person is in charge, even if the deceased person made it known, I don't want them to have anything to do with it. That person has the legal authority over the deceased. And that's something that has come up in recent times more than ever. The living girlfriend feel like she got all rights and privileges. The living boyfriend, the companion, or however you want to call it, think that they have all rights and privileges. They have zero rights and privileges. And the next of kin is that spouse that lives 1,000 miles away, and they can come in and say, you know what? This is my last opportunity. I'm going to cremate them. And you can't stop them. Thought I'd throw that in. I know you want to leave on a high note, but that's a need to know situation that just came from the satellite. Wow.
I'm shaking my head because you just opened up a whole other can of worms. Listen, you know what? Here's what I'm discovering through this conversation. How you live is exposed in how you die.
Correct. You cannot, in Revelation, cover that. It is what it is. If you're holy, be holy still. If you're ungodly, be ungodly still. It's going to be what it is. And you have already preached your own funeral, and you've already left your legacy. We're just trying to put some paper to it. And there have been some moments of humor where the preacher was standing in the pulpit eulogizing a person. And I mean, they really had fluffed it up a little bit and flattered it up and did a whole lot of things. And then the spouse raised her hand at the end of the sermon and said, Pastor, I have one problem. I heard who you preached about, but I need the funeral director to come back up and open that casket, because who you preached about is not the same person I thought was in that casket. So I need to see who's in there again. because
That's actually happened before?
oh my God. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. For real. They use it for sarcasm, but it's for real. And that's why ministers, men and women of God, need to make sure that they stick with the scripture if they don't know the subject.
All right, I got to close now because
Yes, sir.
woo-wee!
Yes,
Y'all,
indeed.
listen, we having all kinds of conversations on the Wise Idea podcast, and good gracious.
The wisest idea is to get it right with God and get it right with your family, and then you'll be right with the funeral director.
It's not often that I'm speechless in life or on the podcast, but I'm really trying to turn the corner here, and there's so many more questions I got, but our time is gone.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Stay tuned to this station as we pause for station identification.
Good gracious! All right, so here's what we're gonna do. So I have a tradition on the podcast. In every episode when I have a guest on, where I ask these quick fire questions, and so the goal is for you to answer the question with the first thought that comes to mind as quickly as you can.
Wow.
All right. So here we go. All right. And I know this is going to be a little bit different answer probably for you than for most people because you're juggling 20 hats at one time. But
okay,
tell us what the typical first 2 hours of your day looks like.
Right into the office and just to figuring out which office.
How many do you have?
Well, right now I only have 4.
Only 4.
Yes.
Okay. Apple or PC?
PC.
Favorite food?
Oh, oxtails, rice, collard greens, cornbread, macaroni and cheese.
He gave us his favorite meal, y'all.
That's right. Yeah, you can't just do favorite food. You got to do a favorite meal. All right.
Can y'all tell he's a country guy?
Oh man.
All right. Do you have a bucket list?
Do I have a bucket list? My bucket list changes each day.
Okay. Favorite quote?
In all of thy ways, acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy path.
Last 3 books you've read?
The Bible, The Simple Church, and Purpose Driven.
Have you read anything recently that had nothing to do with church or ministry or work?
No.
All right. What has been the highest moment of your life?
When I surrendered my life to Christ. And since that day, I have never been the same. It has been a joyride, even in the valley.
All right. So outside of that decision, what has been the highest moment of your life?
Jayla Faith Wright. That's the only granddaughter.
Okay. So not even so you would put the granddaughter above the children in the wedding.
Yeah. All of that had to happen in order for that to happen. So it's not an above situation, but it's kind of like the apex.
Okay. What do you think about when you're alone in the car?
What do I think about? The gratefulness to be alone, because that is a rare occasion. Just grateful to be alone, just to have some me time.
Okay. Your favorite TV show?
Oh my. The news.
What?
It's not a show. I'm a news junkie.
Are you?
And that's every day.
Okay.
Stay on that.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite movie?
A movie? What is that?
I guess you just answered the question. All right.
Courageous. I'll use courageous.
Okay. Last question. Did you win any superlatives in high school?
Did I win any superlatives in high school? That's a long time ago.
So you don't remember?
No, I can't remember that far back. That was 1977. I do remember that I was, I want to think that it was most likely to succeed. Was the one that I was. I remember getting one, but I can't remember exactly what it was because I was senior class president. I was president of the. I was editor of the school yearbook, and so I had so many things going on back then. I had several offices back then as well. So what can I say?
That's funny. All right, so
Honor Society and Beta Club and all of that stuff, and I did everything but sports.
Okay. So all right. So I said earlier that that was going to be the last question. This is going to be the last question.
All right.
What is the funniest thing that's ever happened to you?
The funniest thing that ever happened to me, it's so many. Let me just draw from one when I was a child, and I was at the funeral home, and I knew that that's what I wanted to do and where I wanted to be to serve the families. This was one of those times that I was not really allowed in the embalming room, but there was the chapel, and there was a hallway between the chapel and the embalming room where car wash and other things that you use, cleaning supplies and things of that nature was. And so there were two doors to get to the embalming room. So I had already entered the first door. And when I got into the first door, and I was pouring a little bit of car wash in an empty bucket so that I could prepare to wash cars. And again, I looked at the board as a kid, teenager. I looked at the board and I said, oh my God, there's so many people that's deceased. And so at the end of the day, I thought I was the only person that was alive in that part of the funeral home. Where there was a gentleman who worked there, who worked at night at the bakery, and so he would come, instead of going home, he would come to the funeral home and he would lay down in the in one of the back areas, and he heard me, and I didn't know he was there. And so by the time I was pouring the car wash into the bucket, the door was like trying to open. I nailed that door closed, and he could not get it open. I mean, I was hollering, who is this? Who is this? Who is this? I couldn't think of which one of the seven could have been getting up to get me. And once my strength kind of left, he was able to open the door, and he laughed at me. But that was a childhood memory that I will never forget. And I tell people all the time, do not try to scare anyone in a funeral home, because people are still frightened of funeral homes.
All right, y'all. Well, there you have it. We have dealt with everything from the rooter to the tutor today, and I know it was an awkward conversation for some of you guys, but please hear me. It was a necessary conversation. I've said from the very beginning when I started this podcast, our goal is to provide tools and strategies for hearts to live inspired and heads to live wise. And I believe that we've done that today. So thank you again, Pastor Flatt, for being on. Thank you again for those of you that are joining us for this episode of the Wise Idea Podcast. I hope that you've enjoyed our time together. If you did and you would like additional resources and information, of course, you can go to thewiseideapodcast.com. There you can find all of the show notes and previous episodes. Of course, our announcer is going to come and give you more details of how to connect with us on social media. But let me end again the way I started and invite you and ask you, head over to iTunes and leave a rating and a review. Again, that's how other listeners find us. We are also on Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. And I would love to hear from you directly. Send us an email at info, I-N-F-O, at thewiseideapodcast.com. Thank you again for joining us. We look forward to connecting with you the next time. I'm going to end today's episode the way I end every single one of them. Live wisely.
Thanks again for joining us on another episode of the Wise Idea Podcast with Christopher J. Harris. We hope you enjoyed our time together. If you did and would like additional resources and information, you can find the previous episodes, show notes, featured guest information, and more at www.thewiseideapodcast.com. We also invite you to join the conversation on social media. The Wise Idea Podcast is on Twitter and Facebook. Find us at The Wise Idea and at our Facebook group, The Wise Idea Podcast. On Instagram, find us at The Wise Idea Podcast. Our host is also on social media. You can find him regularly on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Pinterest, all located at CJ Harris 1. Finally, if you enjoyed what you've heard, head over to iTunes and or Google Play and leave a rating and review for other listeners to find us. Our podcast is also on Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. Thanks again for joining us. We will see you the next time. Live wisely.